The moment the rock hit, the world seemed to freeze. For a second, everything paused. The air held its breath, the trees stopped swaying, and the distant sound of children's laughter from the park became a soft hum, barely audible. In the blink of an eye, Rook, the German shepherd, staggered back, his body trembling with confusion and pain. He shook his head violently, but it was the frantic pawing at his right eye that turned the air thick with panic. His eye, once so sharp and perceptive, once used to catch the slightest movement, was now swelling, its clarity clouded by something unseen, a tragedy unfolding in real time. My heart hammered against my chest as I dropped to my knees beside him, fingers trembling as I touched the side of his face, feeling the warmth of his blood-soaked fur. The pain in his gaze was not just physical, it was the painful realization that I, his protector, had failed him. But what could I do now? The seconds dragged on, pulling us deeper into the uncertainty. My mind screamed at me to act, but all I could do was hold his head against my chest and whisper promises of rescue that felt too hollow. What would I do if I couldn't save him? It was a bright morning, the kind that trickles warmth into your bones, making you believe that the world outside is an endless horizon of possibility. Rook, my faithful German shepherd, trotted beside me on the familiar trail of the local park. His tail swayed lazily behind him like a steady metronome marking the beat of our day. The wind was gentle, and the air carried the faint scent of grass and pine. A perfect morning, a perfect companion. We had walked this path so many times, side by side, our bond quiet but strong. I had always marveled at how Rook had become my shadow. His eyes, so wise and full of quiet understanding, seemed to know me better than anyone else. He never asked questions, never expected anything but my company. And in return, he gave me the kind of loyalty that was rare, pure, and unwavering. It wasn't just the bond of owner and pet. It was the kind of partnership that only happens when two souls understand one another without the need for words. We walked through the park as the sun hovered low in the sky, casting long, soft shadows on the ground. The park was peaceful, families played on the grass, children ran through the open fields, and the sounds of laughter floated in the breeze. Rook loved the freedom of these walks, and I loved the peace they brought me. It felt like we were part of something bigger, a quiet, harmonious rhythm that only those who truly felt connected to the earth could understand. But I never could have predicted what would happen next. The moment happened so quickly I didn't even see it coming. The air, which had felt so calm just moments before, suddenly shifted. I heard a soft rustling behind us, then a sharp thud. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of something hitting flesh. Rook yelped in surprise and staggered back, his body twisting in confusion and pain. I froze for a moment, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The world around me went silent for a brief second, and then the chaos of the moment poured in. Rook's pain-filled cry echoed in my ears, and I saw the blood immediately staining the white fur around his right eye. Instinctively, I rushed to him, my heart racing, my breath catching in my chest. He stood still for a moment, stunned, his gaze darting to the side, but it was his right eye that drew my attention. The swelling was already beginning to form, and the skin around it was bruised and raw. The first thought that went through my mind was that I needed to get him to the vet immediately. He couldn't lose his sight. But what had happened? I glanced around quickly, trying to make sense of it. That was when I saw it. A stone, lying just a few feet away. Someone had thrown it, or perhaps it had been a careless accident, but it had hit Rook right in the eye. A feeling of helplessness surged through me. My strong, dependable dog, the one who had protected me countless times, was now the one in need of saving. I hadn't seen the danger coming. I hadn't anticipated it. Rook shook his head violently, trying to dislodge whatever had hit him. His paw instinctively went to his eye, pressing against it, trying to relieve the pressure. The pain in his movements was impossible to ignore. I knelt beside him, reaching out to him, my fingers trembling as I gently touched the side of his face. He turned his head slowly towards me, his eyes clouded with confusion and discomfort. "Rook, it's going to be okay," I said, my voice shaking. But even I didn't believe the words. How could it be okay? The sight of his injured eye, swollen and bruised, filled me with a sickening dread. I felt the panic rising inside me, but I had to push it down. He needed me to be strong now. I had to be the one to guide him through this, just as he had done for me so many times before. But what if it wasn't okay? What if this was the beginning of a long, painful journey for him? What if I lost him? The thought was unbearable. I pushed it away, trying to stay focused. I helped him stand, my hand steadying him as he tried to regain his footing. His legs wobbled slightly, but he seemed to want to move to be okay. It wasn't just his eye, there was something else in his demeanor, something I couldn't quite put into words. He had always been strong, resilient, able to bounce back from anything. But now, as I looked at him, I wasn't sure. I knew we had to get to the vet, but the urgency of the moment made everything feel like it was moving in slow motion. I reached into my pocket for my phone, my hands shaking. I dialed the vet's number, explaining as quickly as I could that we needed to get in right away. As the phone call ended, I looked at Rook. His gaze met mine, full of trust and confusion, as if asking me why this had happened. I didn't have an answer. I could only promise him that we would fix this somehow. The path ahead felt uncertain, full of fear and unknowns, but I would stay by his side through it all. I had to. The drive to the clinic was a blur, a stretch of time that felt like it could have been hours, though it was only minutes. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, the cold air from the open window doing little to calm the storm brewing inside me. Rook, usually so still and composed, shifted restlessly in the back seat, his body trembling with each painful breath. He had never been one to show weakness, but the way he flinched every time the car hit a bump made it clear. Something was terribly wrong. "Hang in there, boy," I muttered, my voice tight, cracking under the strain. I kept my eyes on the road, though my heart was on fire, racing with thoughts of what might be happening to him. His injury, his eye kept flashing in my mind, its swollen shape almost too much to bear. The longer we were on the road, the harder it became to push the fear away. The silence in the car felt suffocating. Rook's labored breathing was the only sound, punctuated by the occasional, soft whine of distress that broke through his controlled exterior. It tore at my heart each time he made the sound, as if he was asking me for something I couldn't provide. An answer, reassurance, comfort. What could I give him when I didn't even know if the vet would be able to save him? The road stretched out before me, each curve feeling like an eternity. I could hardly think straight, my brain trapped in a whirlwind of worst-case scenarios. What if he lost his sight completely? What if the stone had done more damage than I realized? What if I was too late? The weight of these questions settled heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time I glanced at Rook in the rearview mirror, I saw him trying to sit up straighter, his face contorted in pain, his good eye looking out the window as if searching for something to anchor him to the world around him. But I saw the fear in his movements, the hesitation in his steps as he tried to adjust. The dog who had always been so confident, so in control, was now the one struggling. A sharp, painful lurch in my gut made me want to pull over, to stop the car and just hold him, but I couldn't afford to lose time. He needed professional care, and I had to get him to the clinic. Fast. I knew I wasn't a vet. I knew I couldn't fix this on my own, but I had to believe that we could get there in time. Minutes seemed to drag on, each one stretching further than the last. The wind outside had picked up, causing the trees to sway violently, their branches scratching against the car windows. The scent of wet asphalt and earth filled the air, mixing with the scent of Rook's blood, which lingered in the car, heavy and metallic. I kept my eyes trained on the road, my hands firmly clutching the wheel, willing myself to focus. But with each passing second, the uncertainty grew. I didn't know what I was feeling anymore. Panic had taken over, but underneath it was something deeper, something darker guilt. A suffocating, overwhelming guilt that I hadn't protected him, that I hadn't seen the danger until it was too late. Rook had been my protector, my rock, and now he was the one who needed saving. How could I live with myself if I couldn't help him? How could I call myself his owner if I failed him when he needed me the most? I glanced at him in the rearview mirror again. His eyes, though one was swollen and bruised, still held that familiar trust. The kind of trust that made him follow me into any situation, no matter how dangerous. I thought back to the times when he had saved me, when he had stood beside me during my darkest moments, and it hit me with a wave of grief. This wasn't just about a dog and his owner. This was about a partnership, a bond that had been forged over years of shared experiences, of mutual reliance. Rook had always been there for me. Now it was my turn to be there for him. The vet's office was just ahead, its sign coming into view through the haze of my racing thoughts. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, the engine roaring as the car surged forward. I knew it wouldn't be enough to erase the fear in my heart, but it felt like a small, desperate act of defiance. I wasn't ready to lose him. Not now, not ever. We pulled into the parking lot, the tires screeching against the pavement as I skidded to a stop. Without a second thought, I threw open the door and rushed to the back seat, my hands shaking as I unbuckled Rook's harness. He looked up at me, his gaze clouded with pain, and I tried to steady myself. "We're here, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it cracked with emotion. "But we're going to make it, I promise." With that, I helped Rook out of the car, his legs unsteady but determined. Together, we made our way toward the clinic door, my heart racing as I prayed it wasn't too late. I could feel his warmth, his breathing, each step we took as if we were tethered together by an invisible thread. The receptionist greeted us with a look of concern, and within minutes, Rook was whisked away into the back, his body following the same path I had walked down countless times before. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. The clinic's sterile environment felt suffocating now, each moment stretching as I waited for news. My thoughts raced, my heart screamed in my chest, but I couldn't do anything but wait. I couldn't fix this on my own. I had done all I could now. I had to trust in the people who had the knowledge and the skills to help him. The silence of the waiting room was deafening. The walls, painted in soft whites and grays, felt like they were closing in around me. The other patients, mostly cats and smaller dogs, seemed oblivious to my distress, their soft mews and barks blending into the noise of my mind. All I could hear was my heartbeat, pounding in my ears, urging me to hope, to believe that Rook was going to be okay. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the door opened. The vet stepped through, her expression unreadable, and I immediately rose to my feet. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile before speaking. "The surgery will be difficult, but there's a chance," she said, her voice steady but kind. "We'll do everything we can to save his eye. It's a long shot, but it's worth it." My heart skipped a beat. Hope, it was there just within reach, and I grabbed onto it with both hands. "Thank you," I whispered. "Please save him." She nodded and walked away, leaving me with the weight of my words. The tension in my chest eased slightly, but the fear didn't go away. I sat back down, taking deep breaths to calm myself, but the worry and uncertainty clung to me like a heavy fog. All I could do now was wait. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like hours. But as I sat there, the reality began to settle in. No matter the outcome, Rook had already shown me what it meant to be strong. And now, it was my turn to do the same for him. The waiting room seemed to stretch into an endless void, the sterile walls closing in like a box around me. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound, a constant, irritating presence that added to the weight of the moment. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, but all I could smell was the metallic scent of Rook's blood on my hands, still fresh in my mind. My heart beat so loudly in my chest that I almost couldn't hear the muffled sounds from the back room where Rook had been taken. I felt as though I was standing at the edge of an abyss, unable to see what lay beneath, but knowing I had to trust that something, anything, would pull us through. The minutes felt like hours. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, but I couldn't focus on the time, on the numbers, on the passing seconds. Every tick made my heart tighten, pulling at my chest as if it were caught on a string. I kept running my hands through my hair, pushing back the feeling of panic, of the fear that this might be it, that I might lose him. I glanced at the receptionist, her face a mask of professionalism as she typed into the computer. She had asked if I wanted to sit down, if I needed anything, but I hadn't been able to respond to her. The words wouldn't come out. All I could do was stand, rooted in place, waiting for any sign, any shred of hope that would tell me Rook would be okay. Suddenly, the door to the back room opened. The vet stepped out, her face serious, but not without the faintest trace of kindness. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood immediately, every nerve in my body screaming for answers. "Mr. Daniels?" she said softly. I nodded. My throat dry, my voice caught somewhere between hope and dread. "How is he?" She paused for a moment, her eyes studying me, almost as if she were weighing the best way to break the news. But then her face softened. "Rook's going to be okay," she said, her voice steady, but there was a quiet relief in it. We've managed to stabilize him. His eye was damaged, but the surgery went as well as we could have hoped. It's a miracle, really. He still has a chance to recover fully." I could barely breathe. "A miracle?" I repeated, as if the word itself wasn't enough to contain the relief I felt. "So, he's going to be okay? His vision?" She nodded. "It will take time, but yes, his vision should be saved. The swelling is already starting to go down, and we'll keep him under observation for the next few hours. He's a strong dog. That much is clear. That much is clear." I felt the weight in my chest lift, if only slightly, and the tightness in my throat began to ease. I hadn't realized just how much I had been holding onto that tiny thread of hope. I had been afraid to believe, afraid to let myself truly imagine that Rook might pull through this, that he might come out of it whole. But here it was. The words I had prayed for. He was going to be okay. The vet continued to explain the next steps. Antibiotics, follow-up care, physical therapy to ensure he wouldn't lose any mobility in his injured eye. She mentioned a few precautions we would need to take, but mostly, she reassured me that with time and proper care, Rook would heal. The relief that surged through me was overwhelming. My legs almost gave out beneath me, and I had to sit down, my body finally allowing itself to release the tension that had been building for hours. I thanked her over and over, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't know what else to say. Words seemed so small compared to what I had just been through, compared to the weight of everything I had feared and everything I had just learned. I had nearly lost him. I had been so close to losing him forever. The vet gave me a reassuring smile, but it was clear she had seen this kind of fear before. "He'll need you more than ever now," she said softly before she turned to leave. "But he's strong. You'll both get through this." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the sterile waiting room, my hands still shaking as I held on to the news. Rook was going to make it. He was going to be okay. I couldn't help but let the tears fall then, the relief so sudden, so overwhelming, that I couldn't stop them. For the first time in hours, I let myself breathe deeply, letting the weight in my chest finally lift. It wasn't long before they brought Rook back into the room. He looked different, slightly groggy, his face still swollen from the injury in the surgery, but there was something unmistakable in his eyes. That unwavering loyalty, that bond we shared. The moment I saw him, I felt the familiar weight of his presence, the calm he brought with him, even in this moment of uncertainty. He was still my Rook. I knelt down beside him, my fingers running through his fur, gently cradling his head as he rested against me. He nuzzled into my hand, his body still slightly trembling from the trauma, but there was a softness in his movements, a reassurance. "You made it," I whispered, my voice thick. "You're going to be okay." His gaze softened and I could feel his gratitude, his love, even in that moment. He may have been hurting, but he had made it through. And I had made it through with him. We stayed like that for a while, me on the floor, him lying beside me, both of us exhausted but thankful, silent except for the occasional soft breath or sigh. The room felt warmer now, as if the storm outside had finally passed and the sun was beginning to shine again. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words didn't seem necessary. We had been through so much together, and this moment felt like the beginning of something new. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Rook and I were a team. We always had been, and we always would be. The night stretched on as I sat in the cold, fluorescent-lit waiting room, my heart still racing from the shock of everything that had unfolded in the past few hours. It felt like an eternity since Rook was taken away for the surgery, and yet the hands of the clock seemed to crawl forward, as if they were moving at a pace designed to stretch my patience to its breaking point. I was alone in the waiting room, save for a few other anxious pet owners, their eyes empty with worry, their minds preoccupied with the unknowns of their own situations. The low hum of the overhead lights buzzed in the background, adding to the feeling of isolation that had settled in my chest. The place was sterile and impersonal, cold metal chairs, a plastic reception desk, and walls painted in dull white tone. The air was thick with antiseptic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it only heightened the tension I felt. There was no escape from the worry that clung to me, that made every minute stretch longer than the last. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the small, fragile thread of hope that Rook would make it through the surgery. I had sat through countless procedures before, emergency surgeries, vet visits, Everything that came with having a dog who had been trained in law enforcement, who had seen things that I could never fathom. But this was different. This was not some mission or training session. This was my dog, my partner in so many unspoken ways, lying on that cold, sterile table, his fate hanging in the balance. I glanced at my phone, hoping to distract myself, but it was useless. The screen blinked back at me with nothing to offer but a list of missed calls and unread texts. None of them mattered. I wasn't interested in hearing from anyone right now. I needed to focus, to be present for Rook, even if I couldn't be there physically. I thought about him, his strong frame, his steady gaze, the way he always seemed to know exactly what I needed without me saying a word. He had been my protector, my confidant. Now it was my turn to be his. And then the door to the back opened and my heart lurched. A nurse stepped out, her expression unreadable. Her face was impassive, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that seemed to weigh down her every step. She didn't need to say anything. I knew. The surgery was over. Over. He's stable, she said, her voice low, as if she was speaking to herself as much as to me. He's out of surgery. The damage to his eye was significant, but we were able to repair it. There's still some swelling, but we're hopeful. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my chest, struggling to process her words. Hopeful? I asked, my voice shaky. Does that mean, does he still have a chance? The nurse nodded, her face softening as she met my gaze. Yes, it'll take time. We'll have to monitor him closely over the next few days, but he should be able to recover. We'll keep him under observation overnight and reassess in the morning. I felt the weight of her words settle into my bones. It wasn't the definitive answer I had hoped for, but it was enough. Enough to make me believe that Rook was going to make it, that we had made it. I stood up quickly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The nurse led me down a narrow hallway, past rooms filled with animals receiving treatment, their soft whimpers and barks echoing off the wall. The quiet sorrow in the air mirrored my own. This was a place of healing, but it was also a place of uncertainty, where hope and fear coexisted in equal measure. As we reached the room where Rook was resting, my heart swelled in my chest. There he was, lying on a soft bed in a sterile cage, his fur matted and damp from sweat, his breathing shallow but steady. His right eye was swollen, the soft tissue around it bruised and dark, but despite the injury, there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze as I entered the room. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine with that familiar, steady gaze that I had come to rely on. It was as if, in that moment, he was telling me, I'm still here. I'm still with you. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I knelt beside his cage, my hands reaching out to touch the cool bars. A Rook buddy, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. You're going to be okay, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Rook's tail, though slow and weak, wagged a little, brushing against the soft bedding beneath him. The sound was small, but to me it was everything. It was a sign that he was still the dog I knew, still the protector who had always been by my side, who had never faltered in his devotion. This injury, this moment of vulnerability was just that, a moment. We would get through this together. The vet came in a few minutes later, checking Rook's vitals and adjusting the foredrip that was feeding him the fluids he needed to recover. She explained the next steps, emphasizing that the next 24 hours would be critical in terms of monitoring any complications, but I was too focused on Rook to absorb all of her words. I was consumed by the small movements, the soft rise and fall of his chest, the way he looked at me like everything was still okay, like he was trusting me to make it okay. Can I stay with him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The vet hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She left the room, and I was left alone with Rook. The only sound in the room is steady breathing and the occasional rustle of the sheets as he shifted in place. I pulled up a chair beside him, my fingers lightly brushing against his fur. I could feel his warmth under my touch, the comforting, familiar presence of the dog who had been my shadow for so long. I didn't know how long I stayed there, but the world outside seemed to disappear. Time was irrelevant. It was just me and Rook. As I watched him sleep, his body healing, my heart began to settle. The fear that had gripped me so tightly when I first saw his swollen eye began to loosen its hold, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. We weren't out of the woods yet, but the worst was over. No, the first hurdle had been crossed, and Rook had survived. As I sat there, I realized that this moment This act of caring for him in his most vulnerable state was not a one-sided devotion. It was a reminder of the bond we shared, how he had always been there for me, just as I was now here for him. In a way, we had both been saved in this moment, not just physically, but emotionally. I had feared losing him, feared that I couldn't protect him in the way he had always protected me. But here we were, together, and for the first time in hours, I felt a sense of peace settle into my chest. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more sleepless nights, more worries about his recovery. But for now, for this moment, Rook was alive, and I was holding on to that precious fact with everything I had. The first morning after the surgery was strange in the way everything felt both fragile and new. The sun crept in through the blinds, casting soft streaks of light across the floor, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for Rook to take the next step. He lay on his bed in the corner of the clinic room, his body still, save for the occasional twitch of his tail. His right eye, swollen and bruised from the trauma, was now bandaged, a stark contrast to the bright, alert gaze of his uninjured eye. I sat quietly beside him, my hands clasped in my lap, watching him breathe. The room smelled like antiseptic and sterile air, but beneath it, I could still detect the faint, comforting scent of his fur, the smell of home. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there. An hour? 2? Time felt like it had slowed down completely, moving in moments rather than minutes. "Hey, Rook," I whispered, leaning in closer. His ears twitched at the sound of my voice, and for a brief moment he turned his head toward me. The look in his eyes was still a bit cloudy, but there was a flicker of recognition, a soft understanding that made my chest tighten. The worst was over, but it didn't change the fact that he was hurting. His body had endured a lot in the past 24 hours, and I could see it in his posture, the way he lay so still, as if trying to conserve every ounce of strength. I reached out to touch his head gently, running my fingers over his fur. But the familiar warmth of his body soothed me, reminding me that he was still here, still with me. He gave a soft sigh, and his body relaxed into my touch, his eyes closing for a moment. He trusted me, and that trust was all I needed to fight through the lingering doubt in my mind. It wasn't going to be easy. The vet had been clear about that. Rook's recovery would take time, physical therapy, medication, follow-ups. But what struck me most in that moment was how deeply this injury had affected me. I had spent so many years focused on Rook's strength, on his resilience. He had always been the one to protect me, to make sure I was safe. But now it was my turn to be the protector. The weight of that responsibility settled over me, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an honor. Rook stirred slightly, his eyes flickering open once again, though this time they seemed sharper, more alert. I smiled softly, running my hand along the side of his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the soft thrum of his pulse. There was something healing in the way he looked at me, something that reassured me that no matter what had happened, we were going to make it through this, together. As the morning hours passed, the vet came in to check on him. She examined the bandages, checked his vitals, and reassured me once again that his recovery was progressing well. "His eye is healing," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The swelling has gone down significantly, and the tissues are starting to regenerate. We just need to keep monitoring him closely." I nodded, hanging on to every word, letting it sink in, the relief finally starting to set in. The physical healing would take time. There was no rushing it, but the emotional healing for both of us would be a journey we'd take together. Rook had always been the one to carry me through the tough moments, to offer that silent support when I needed it the most. Now I had to do the same for him. That night, as I sat by his side once more, watching him drift off to sleep, I realized something. The fear I had felt when I first saw his injury, the overwhelming panic that had nearly crippled me, had given way to something deeper, a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for every day I had with him, for every quiet moment we had shared. I knew we had both been through something life-changing, and though the journey ahead would still have its challenges, we had already come so far. The following days were a blur of recovery, daily visits to the vet administering medication and guiding Rook through his physical therapy exercises. Each day I saw him improve just a little bit more. His tail wagged a little longer, his steps grew steadier. And though he still struggled with some pain, the spark in his eye returned, along with that familiar warmth I had missed so much. One afternoon, a week after the surgery, Rook finally managed to stand and walk on his own for the first time. His steps were slow and cautious, but they were there. I couldn't help but smile, a tear slipping down my cheek as I watched him move, his body carrying the weight of both his past strength and his current fragility. He was still Rook. He was still my protector. And as the days turned into weeks, Rook's recovery continued, slow but steady. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when his healing was slower than expected, moments when I could see the remnants of his pain. But each day, as I looked into his eyes and felt his body beside me, I knew we were moving forward. We were healing together. By the time Rook was fully recovered, it felt as if the two of us had gone through a rebirth of sorts. We had been broken down, yes, but in the process we had built something stronger, something deeper. The bond we shared was no longer just about loyalty or companionship. It was about survival, about trust, and about the resilience of both the human heart and the dog's spirit. We had come through this together, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them as we always had, side by side. That night, as I sat by his side once more, watching him drift off to sleep, I realized something. The fear I had felt when I first saw his injury, the overwhelming panic that had nearly crippled me, had given way to something deeper, a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for every day I had with him, for every quiet moment we had shared. I knew we had both been through something life-changing, and though the journey ahead would still have its challenges, we had already come so far. The following days were a blur of recovery, daily visits to the vet, administering medication and guiding Rook through his physical therapy exercises. Each day I saw him improve just a little bit more. His tail wagged a little longer. His steps grew steadier, and though he still struggled with some pain, the spark in his eye returned, along with that familiar warmth I had missed so much. One afternoon, a week after the surgery, Rook finally managed to stand and walk on his own for the first time. His steps were slow and cautious, but they were there. I couldn't help but smile, a tear slipping down my cheek as I watched him move, his body carrying the weight of both his past strength and his current fragility. He was still Rook. He was still my protector. And as the days turned into weeks, Rook's recovery continued, slow but steady. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when his healing was slower than expected, moments when I could see the remnants of his pain. But each day, as I looked into his eyes and felt his body beside me, I knew we were moving forward. We were healing together. By the time Rook was fully recovered, it felt as if the two of us had gone through a rebirth of sorts. We had been broken down, yes, but in the process we had built something stronger, something deeper. The bond we shared was no longer just about loyalty or companionship. It was about survival, about trust, and about the resilience of both the human heart and the dog's spirit. We had come through this together, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them as we always had, side by side, and as the days turned into weeks, Rook's recovery continued. Slow but steady. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when his healing was slower than expected, moments when I could see the remnants of his pain. But each day as I looked into his eyes and felt his body beside me, I knew we were moving forward. We were healing together. By the time Rook was fully recovered, it felt as if the two of us had gone through a rebirth of sorts. We had been broken down, yes, but in the process we had built something stronger, something deeper. The bond we shared was no longer just about loyalty or companionship. It was about survival, about trust, and about the resilience of both the human heart and the dog's spirit. We had come through this together, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them as we always had, side by side.